And we're joined by an absolute favourite of everybody's, Paul Sinclair. Paul, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Paul. And hello to you and hello to Steve. Great to be invited to, just share a few stories. And,
it's good to have you along.
Ideas about.
I think this is the 5th year in a row now.
Is it really? It's good. We enjoy talking together, don't we? It's not just...
We do, yeah.
We're friends. It's not just sort of, oh, God, I've got to do a bit of a radio podcast for Paul. I enjoy talking with you guys, so...
Checks in the post, buddy.
Oh, thank you.
So, I think, funny enough, you've got a book out, and it's your new book. So, when did it get released?
Oh, I would have thought, I don't know exact date, but probably about 3 months ago.
Yeah, and this is the first time I've had chance to actually speak to you about it. You've been in great demand.
Yeah, and I have actually cut things back a little bit for no other reason than you just get a little bit saturated with radios and podcasts, and it's nice to be in demand, don't get me wrong, but you do get a little bit saturated. I think part of my problem, if it is a problem, is I like to give people different bits of information.
Okay.
So, but it's not a never-ending pot of information, so you feel like, I feel like I'm repeating sometimes, even though your audience, Paul, probably will be different to another podcast's audience. But that's just the way it is. I know there's some researchers and some people who've lived on stories for the last 30 years and they tell their story over and over again. That would absolutely drive me bananas, to be honest with you, but it's just the way it is.
No, I totally understand that. And I think, is that partly what drove you to write the book? Because it's very much a paranormal story of your life, isn't it?
Yeah, and there were never any intention to write Night People when I started writing truth proof books. But I'd got these diaries. I had one that were absolutely chocker with information. I call it the Book of the Strange. And every time something happened, I think I'd been putting stuff in it, well, at least from early 2000s. And I lent it to a good friend, or I showed it to a good friend and left it at his house. He might get to listen to this. I hope he does, because he kept it. And that you don't hear me badmouth people, so I won't say no names, but they know who they are. And it's really, really annoyed me. And they've had it for about 7 or 8 years now, and I know they've got it. I were being very generous, and I'd given them some items of furniture, and I took this with me, and I left it at the side of a chair.
Okay.
Where we're going with this one, but the Book of the Strange, there was even more information in that to actually contribute to Night People than what's in Night People.
And was that like a scrapbook that you kept, or was it like a draft? Or
it was a thick scrapbook, yeah. And if anything happened, I wrote it down. There's not much happening at the moment, but I'll make note of anything that, however insignificant it might seem, and I'd urge everybody to do that, because these little anecdotes, these little bits of information may become relevant even in 3 weeks' time, in a month's time. But it's amazing how quickly you forget about them. When I was writing Night People, and one of my daughters, Jessica, started reading it, she said, "Dad, can I have a copy of the book?" She said, "Dad," I can't believe that you've remembered some of these things. She says, "I remember them as I'm reading it." I'm thinking, God, my dad's remembered all this, but it's not. I don't think it's part of having an incredible memory. It's part of making notes. This is just an envelope, but making notes. If something happens, make notes. Well, earlier this week, I think it was Monday, I very rarely anything happens in our home now, and something made a very large noise in the room. The little dog sleeps in hallway. He started barking. It were in our room, and I looked at the clock. It was 1:32. I've made a note of it. Nothing else. Nothing. There might be nothing paranormal. Do you know what I mean? It could have just been something falling off a shelf.
Yeah.
But I've made a note of it, because if things start to happen, then it's relevant.
There's an old phrase that says, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And, because people can just make stuff up on the spot. But if you've got it down and you can point to it, then certainly it's going to make life easier when it comes to writing books. But equally, it just gives that extra touch of truthfulness, truth proof, if you like.
It does, Paul. But we're only dealing with everybody's not just myself, when it comes to the subject of the paranormal, just in my opinion, we're only dealing with other people's, mine and other people's stories. We can't actually prove, we can prove very little of this.
Yeah.
When I'm looking into the animal mutilations around East and North Yorkshire, I know we're going to talk about a book, but I'll just stick with this for a moment because you were talking about writing it down. I noted that I'd been told this deer had been found in a particular place on Cliff Lane with this huge hole in its side, this circular hole through its side, and I noted the date, and I think it was August 28th, 2017. I could have got that date wrong because it's just flipped out of my head, but I wrote it down. When I went and spoke to the farmer about the sheep mutilations and the strange things that were happening, he'd got a date down in his diary of finding these 30 sheep in the sheep run, the old 6 sheep nose to tail, and he gave me the date.
Mm-hmm.
Was the 28th of July or whatever date it was, and I immediately just got my book, because if I'd have took that to him later, he'd have could have thought, well, I bet he's just wrote that down. Yeah, it doesn't prove that any of it, but it's that writing things down and getting as much of the detail down as possible just helps in the long run. And I don't think we're saying or I'm saying anything that we don't already know, but I think too many people, myself included, do miss little facts that are important at the time, where you just think, oh, I'll just let that go. It were next to nothing, or I'll write about it tomorrow. No, write about it as it's happened. When you wake up in the morning, if it's 1:32, get it written down, because in 4 days' time, you might think, well, it 2:32. It might not even be relevant, but
I think you're absolutely right. Over time, the memory changes, and when you play things back to yourself, they get affected by other things that happen in your life. And over a period of time, your really good memory of an incident that happened on the day will change into something else just ever so slightly.
Distorts, and that was the problem with Night People. That's why there's so many breaks in it, and there's not a lot of stories that go from, say, 1 to 10. I might have a 1, 2, and then I might have a 4, like a 7, 8, and there's nothing in between, because they're only little cameos of memories. And it would have been so easy to have lied, or maybe not even lied. Maybe lied's not the word. It'd been so easy to fill it in with what I thought might have happened.
Do you have any recollection, Paul, of what it was that actually made you start writing things down and journaling?
Yeah, I think I started writing it down in 1990s. All this stuff had happened during childhood. Then there was a sort of a little bit detachment from it happening. Then we got some more of it happening when me and Mary got our first house. And then, and then in 1994, I think, when we moved to Bridlington, it were almost like another page opened, and it started right away. And when I'm sat there and I've got all these memories, but I've not really pieced everything together. It's hard to explain, but I've got all these memories of these things that had happened. But then when it started in 1994, and you're sort of, I wouldn't say mature, but you've got an adult perspective on it, not a child / teenager's perspective. And yes, I can remember we'd been for a meal with friends, and a Chinese meal, and a big group of us. And it were a warm night, and I'd got all these holes in my arm, and like people are saying, "How you done them? Is it contagious?" And I'm saying, I'm lying. I'm saying I don't know. I just woke up and they were there. And, I didn't say I'd seen these lights or I'd seen this, because I think fear. I think the fear of knowing that you're talking about something so personal to yourself, so real, so vivid, only to sit with a group of people who you actually like and just to get laughed at. It's a difficult situation.
You say it's very personal, and it is, because it's about yourself, isn't it? But
yeah.
How did the rest of your family react to this, like Mary and your daughters as well?
Well, there's a lot of stuff happened with Mary, but Mary's she's very, very quiet, and so she doesn't say much. So, but the things that are in the book, she knows exactly, and the things that have happened with the daughters, and a few things that have happened with a few of the grandchildren now, they're okay with it. I've not named any names, although I suppose people would be easy enough to trace if they wanted to. But yeah, they're okay with it. I mean, I did speak. I spoke to Whitley Strieber and asked him what he thought when I was going to publish Night People, and he asked me. He did say to me, think really hard before you do it. And it were to and fro in whether to do it or whether not to do it. There were a story in there that I didn't want to put in particularly, but I have done, and that seems to be the one people want to talk about, and I don't want to talk about it because it quite honestly frightened me.
Yeah.
It's just a collection of memories. I looked on the reviews for the book. I don't know, last week, and there's somebody put a review on, and they've said that I think I've been abducted by aliens. When I say aliens, I don't necessarily believe that they're from space or from living underground. I don't know where they're from, but there's been some interaction. But the reviewer, and he's entitled to his opinion, and I fully respect it, but the reviewer were implying that I've imagined it all, I think. But I mean, and it's typical sleep paralysis. I think that's what it said in the review. I think to myself, it can't leave scars on your body.
No, absolutely. I've had sleep paralysis. I had it for about 6 months, about 5 years ago, and it's completely different. It to me, it just doesn't. It doesn't overlap with this at all. It was a very strange thing. I knew where I was and I knew what was going on, but
you know what?
Sometimes the skeptic's answer to a lot of this is even more balmy than what the person who believes is putting forward. It's a bit like a certain UFO case where a skeptic has effectively said there are walking lighthouses.
It's ridiculous. I know who you're on about, and I mean I think the guy's a really intelligent man. And I find it difficult when I know he's done the research, and we all know what case this is about, but I know he's done the research. However, the guys who were there, feet on ground, who are shouting, "This was not a lighthouse. We know the difference," and that could have been replicated any day of the week, any time of the year, or we might have to wait 6 months till we've got those weather conditions again. But
precisely,
you weren't there. It wasn't a lighthouse, and still, they scream that. Well, we've explained it. This is my theory, and this is what I believe. Now, full respect to the guy for his credentials and everything, because I'm not into knocking people, but I happen to believe that we need to place a little bit of faith in the first-hand witnesses, unless they're all completely cuckoo. But in that particular case, we've got a lot of military personnel in that forest over a period of nights, not night, claiming that they'd seen and experienced things and it wasn't a lighthouse. Then I think we need to really think to ourselves, no, it wasn't. But why does that voice get heard? Why does the skeptic's voice get heard? Because he's coming out with something that's rational, that is plausible, however implausible it might seem, because we've got actual witnesses saying, no way, this wasn't it.
But I think we're finding now that even outlets like Fox News are becoming it's becoming part of the mainstream. And if Fox News have got it on, you think, and they're not doing it from a sarcastic way or from a comedic way. They're actually being very, 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 very serious about all this.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what's changed. Where are we going with this?
I was watching a video on YouTube earlier. It was Tucker Carlson on Fox News from yesterday, I think it was, and he was reporting a USO triangle, which was obviously something that was coming up at the time. They had an English guy on there doing some talking head work around it, and I didn't recognize him, but they were both speaking sense, and it's becoming more and more mainstream. But I'd like to run this point past you, Paul, just to see what you think. As you know, I'm ex-RAF, and Charles Holt, he was a deputy base commander of a fighter base or a bomber base. They know the lay of the land outside their walls. They know what is around, because they have to defend their base when it all comes on top, so they know where things are, and it just beggars belief, really.
Well, I can't remember the British base that's close to it. I told Charles Holt, I think I told John Hanson, and when he came through to do the conference at OLM in Hull, I were hoping to line him up with this guy who doesn't live far from me, who was on the British base during the incident. I wish I could remember the name of it, but
Is it Honington?
No.
Okay.
No. It'll come to me after this because I didn't expect we'd be talking about this. But my point is, I spoke to him face to face, and he told me that American cars came up after the incident. They were blue and white cars. Men in suits got out of the cars and took their radar tapes because they tracked objects on the banks.
Yeah.
So you know, I mean, that weren't a lighthouse. So you're right there, Steve. But you know, and as Paula said earlier, you know, when they've got these people out in the forest, there'll have been powers higher than them, sort of, I don't know, scrutinising what these men were actually looking for and what these men were actually seeing. And you would have thought somebody would have said, "Come on, everybody get back in. It's a lighthouse. You're all mistaken." No, but that didn't happen, did it? You know, and I don't know. I think it's been cooked and cooked and cooked, the story. I think it's incredible. I think it's an incredible UFO-related event, but can it be done anymore?
Yeah, I think in the same way that you can tell yourself a lie time and time again and it becomes true to you, I think the skeptics can tell the opposite of the lie and debunk until it becomes their truth.
Well, you see, the skeptics know, regardless of what case it might be, are always have, in my opinion, the upper hand, because they're appealing to the public, to the populace, and the vast majority of people who might not have had an experience are going to fall with the plausible answer. Mm-hmm. You know, it's, you know, a lot of people, as you know, Steve, it's like, well, I don't believe it unless I've seen it myself. Well, if I see it, then I'll believe it. So if a skeptical-minded person comes out with an explanation for what I've seen or what somebody sees a trawlerman might have seen, or a lifeboat man out at Bridlington or in Scarborough, or someone at Rendlesham, and that's thrown out to the public at large, you're always going to go with, well, yeah, I think this guy's right. It is a plausible answer. That's what we'll go with.
I think there's a difference between a skeptical mind and a denying mind.
Yeah.
Because there will be people who will just go, no. And you'll tell them and you'll show the information, you'll show the data and the research. No, not interested. We're not going any further with this. You're wrong. It was a walking lighthouse. You know, it's that sort of mentality that you're dealing with.
I've actually spoke to people who've had incredible sightings who don't want to talk about it because it's clashed with what they believe.
Precisely.
You know, and it just closed down, which is wrong, but that's the way of people, isn't it? You know what I mean? I'd like to think that you're not so blinkered that you believe everything that I would say or that anyone would say to be the gospel truth. I mean, we like to think we're telling truth, but, you know, you got some people that will just absolutely believe anything and like go up into the sky and see two satellites and that's some kind of message from Ashtar Command or something. Do you know what I mean? And it's not. It's satellites. But you know, but there's genuine things being seen. There's genuine things being experienced. What we're looking into with Dark Forest, I've said this before. Never thought I would be one little bit interested in the cryptids. That just weren't my subject. But I've had so many people come to me. You know, rational people. I mean, one of them's a professor.
Yeah,
and he's seen something incredible with his wife, and you know, it's not sort of shattered his worldview of things, but then you've got different. You've got motor mechanics, and you've got all people from all walks of life claiming to have seen this upright, fur-covered creature in once again, location in a close locality within the forests of East and North Yorkshire. North Yorkshire primarily, that's where I've been today. I've spent all day there, just getting some cutaways and some little shots. 3 of the guys came from Rotherham, so they travelled over 100 miles to meet us. They've been a couple of times straight from work on one occasion to show us where they saw it, where they experienced it. What they got to gain by telling us these stories? One's a gamekeeper. They've gone on camera. They've put their faces on camera. I'd call them excellent first-class witnesses, very genuine people. And they're telling me that they've seen something. They don't know each other, and they're actually describing something. I wouldn't say identical, because that would be wrong, but very similar to what the other parties. One's from 2002, one's from 2018, one's from 2016, one's from January this year on the cliff tops at Flamborough, one's from February the 19th, 2019 on the cliff tops at Flamborough, one's from November the 12th, 2019 from the cliff tops at Speeton. So this location thing just smacks you in the face time and time again. Yeah. What is special about the location, Steve? I don't know. Could these things be living and breathing? There's obviously something physical to them, because the guys in the forest in North Yorkshire, I'm being evasive about the actual forests, because there's a lot of forests, and I've done a lot of research that I think people will enjoy when it comes out, that ties in with what we're looking at.
And it's a very odd place. I've got a cousin who lives in a village called Water, which is just a few miles east of Pocklington. So you've got York, Pocklington, and Waters there. And if I go there, I'll go via Goole and go up that way. And when you get closer and closer to Water, it becomes very, very much more remote.
Yeah,
the forests just seem to come into you.
Yeah,
all of a sudden you're sort of driving down a road that's a standard A road,
and it's heavily treed,
and the shadows as well that come out to you if the sun's in the right direction. You do feel quite.
It's
I'm trying to find the word. That's right. It's an oppression. It's a real oppressive environment.
We've been there today, and what I touched on there, are they flesh and blood? I'll not go into each story in depth because I know that Paul might want to talk about other things, but the Rotherham guys were trapped in the forest with this thing looking at them all night. From after 12 o'clock, it was stood looking at them. They could see its full profile, and they could hear it breathing. It was natural, it's breathing. They thought it were a growl, but it weren't. It was breathing. So there's something physical to these things. But then you've got the woo, you've got the sort of exotic science, if you will like, and the gamekeepers. When he watched him through the window of an abandoned farmhouse when he was sleeping in it, he observed it then a few nights later, because he stayed outside because he wanted to see what it was. And he said it came out of the forest and arrived at the window. He saw no movement in its legs. It was almost as though it were on a track. It arrived. You hear so many accounts of these cryptids where they're not making a sound, and then you've got other accounts where they're creating ultimate fear by crashing and smashing. It's almost as though they can switch in and out. They're like ghosts, because the forest we've been in today, we've been at Harwood Dale, and you'd have to be on all fours to run through it. It's absolutely dense and dark, and you think to yourself, if a man would have trouble manoeuvring in this, what are the chances of a 7 to 8 foot creature with huge shoulders manoeuvring and hiding itself? There's so many things that clash and contradict each other, but I think we need to establish another type of real. We've got to know what is the real, because I don't think they're real. I just don't know what they are. That's probably too riddles, guys. I am sorry.
No, not at all. Reality is different for each person. And so, I mean, if you think back to, on the subject of cryptid sightings, if you think back to August the 16th, and I was very lucky to have a black cat sighting that evening. And the first person I rang, and it was still within sight, I phoned you.
You did.
And, you were very supportive and helpful. And you said, look, get off the phone to me, get more video.
And what did you think, Paul? I mean, let's just switch it for a minute. What did you think when you were actually looking at this thing?
I felt odd. I felt very odd because it was almost like watching a plane crash. It shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And afterwards, I think I felt very honoured and very protective as well. I was having this conversation with Rick Minter, who does the Big Cats Conversations podcast, and it leaves a real imprint on you when you see something like that. So, you know, the guys up in the forest there who had this cryptid come out and see them, it's going to imprint upon them in a big way. But you as a researcher, Paul, how do you sort the wheat from the chaff? How much of it is gut instinct about whether somebody's telling you the truth? How much of it is research?
It's difficult. About 2 weeks ago, a guy wanted to speak to me about his experiences with an alleged cryptid. Talking something like a werewolf type creature, dogman type creature, as they like to call them. And then he started sending me photographs with circles on them of wood, dark areas where he perceived this thing was. And to me, it was just woodland where, is it pareidolia, where we were imagining we were seeing things. Then a few years ago, there were a lady who lived, can't remember the exact place, but she's claimed it had been on her roof. This thing had climbed onto the roof.
Wow.
And saying that it weighed 300 to 400 pounds. Now, when I Googled the place, there were clay pan tiles. Now, being a builder, former builder, joiner betrayed, you've got to be very careful on clay, just ordinary clay pan tiles. It weren't a particularly old house. And we've had a 300 to 400 pound dogman stroke werewolf on clay pan tiles. It would have ended up in the bedroom with her. Do you know what I'm saying?
Perish the thought.
Them tiles would not have support. She could hear it walking about on the roof. It would have gone through the roof. So how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? Probably by listening to stories like that. But I'm not rude to these people. I don't really get involved in that kind of story. But when these Rotherham guys contacted me and told me that they'd been in this forest fishing, because we're on right again the Derwent, the River Derwent, and they'd been in this, where's the Forge Valley, and he broke down crying on the phone, and they wanted to meet us after building up a bit of confidence and trust. We got to meet them, myself, Les Drake, Digital Creations, and Chris Wright. And we went into the forest, and you see how frightened they were because it's the first time they'd been back. You realise, and then, as I say, the gamekeeper, and he's coming out with all these credible stories, and he hasn't got a book full of mystical, wonderful stories. He's got this sighting, he's got this experience of laid in an abandoned farmhouse, sleeping in it overnight, and this thing coming to the window and looking at him. But there's the paranormal aspect that I find incredible that accompanies it. A few days before he saw this, he took his cousin. His cousin was spending a few days with him as he was gamekeeping. And as they're walking back, he's an ex Marine. And as they're walking back, that'll have relevance in a moment. As they're walking back to the farmhouse, a sphere of light just shot up from the side of his leg, and he immediately grabbed his cousin and dropped him to the floor because he thought he'd knocked a tripwire flare. And he expected it to light up above him and squaddies to come running out at any moment, because we're only 5 or 6 miles from Fylingdales, where some of this stuff's happening. So there's military presence at times in the forest. Nothing happened. No sound of the flare, sort of coming up from the floor. No sound in the sky, and then after that, they're hearing the craziest things. They're hearing a baby, him and another gamekeeper, are hearing a baby crying in the forest, which is reported with Bigfoot type incidents and things.
It is. It
says every time we went to where we perceived it was, it stopped and went a little bit deeper into the forest. And so this carried on. And then I don't know I don't know the time span. He doesn't now. It was 2002. But this thing comes to the window. He wakes up in the night feeling strange. Another thing that's reported with these things, people perceive it before they see it and experience it. and it stood at the window just looking down at him. He didn't know if it could see him. He believes it probably could. He didn't see gnashing teeth. He didn't see glowing eyes. He saw a shape that filled the window with its neck as fat as its head, and it's taller than the window looking down. We've been back to this farm. We've filmed him outside it talking about it. You can see I'm animated. I've really enjoyed these witnesses because they're just first class for me.
Well, in the book, one of the things I was saying to Paul about, and I looked at the years and everything. It's a very, very famous UFO photograph from Coningsborough, 1966. It's a Stephen Pratt UFO photograph. And Coningsborough, I mean, you ended up moving there at one stage. And I just wonder, have you ever thought of any links to what you went through?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was it 1966? I think it was, weren't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's around the same time.
It is.
Do you know that this stuff was happening? And since writing Night People, I've had a few people, I wouldn't say from Old Dennerby, but from around Rotherham and Mexborough, that have contacted me and said they'd had experiences around the same time. So it does make you think, you know. And I think there were UFO sightings along what's called Conisbrough Crags as well.
Yes.
Time. You know, I had I think the first one for me, which I put in the book, was again Mexborough Power Station. The cooling towers of Mexborough Power Station, and my dad woke me up to see the sphere of light.
Yeah.
So to midpoint, halfway up the cooling towers, and then to my eyes, it looked like it travelled along the rooftops of Mexborough. I can see it now. 58-year-old. I don't know how old I was. I was a little boy. I think that's the earliest memory that I've got at age 4 or 5 years old. I know some people can probably go back further with memories, but I can't. But I can actually remember pressed up to the window watching it disappear towards Swinton. You know, because you've got Mexborough. I don't know if you know the location.
Yes.
Yeah, of course you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, and it disappeared, and it took ages. And for some reason, excuse me, my dad left me midway, which were odd because he'd never. I can't even recall any other time that he's woke me up to look at anything. Or do you know? He's quite a strict guy. That's all I could say for him. Do you know?
Do you think maybe you'd seen something like that before, but this is the first opportunity he had to, if you like, initiate yourself into this sort of sighting?
It's possible, isn't it? You know, it is possible. He was so detached from. I don't know. It's a difficult one, and I know we're doing a podcast about the unexplained and things, but he were a difficult man to talk to. Mm. In all the time that I knew him, and don't forget, it's my dad, I never heard him say "I love you."
No.
4 girls, I tell them every time I see them. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's strange. He were a very, very. He were cold when it came to anything like that. So it's difficult because you couldn't get inside his mind to find out. I think it might have been 2006 that he told me, not long before he passed away, that his words were, or my mum told me that he said the aliens had been to visit him, and then I went and spoke to him in hospital, and that's what he said. He told me, and he said they were here. They were here.
Grief.
So, and you know, I don't know. I mean, I wish he'd have told me something like that a lot sooner, but he didn't, and that's the only bit I've got. You know.
I think I only got from my late grandfather, because he was a radar operator in during not just during World War II, but afterwards as well. He didn't come out of the RAF until the late 60s. Okay. And he used to tell me that when looking at radar, he would regularly see objects appear and then literally go up 180 degrees as fast as possible. There's nothing that can do this. And he kept on reminding me, radar only picks things up that are there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not imaginary. This stuff.
No, it's there. And he never said what he did, but he always looked quite uncomfortable. He would never go any further than saying that.
It's such a difficult one. There's gonna be military personnel that take the knowledge that we crave, the proof that we crave, to the grave, and it's so sad. there's tons of things sat in my head. It's like my head's like a can of marbles just rattling about, and I forget half of it. But I will. The book 1, Truth Proof, I wrote about the alleged satanic cult that were operating in the area of East and North Yorkshire. Book 2, we touched on it a bit more. Book 3, I realised it was real. It was real. I don't mean it's responsible for A, B, C, D of anything. I'm not going to link it to other things, but I know it were real. I just want these bits of information. They don't prove a great deal, but the skeptics within the area who say, what a load of rubbish you're talking about, I can say, hold on a minute, well, look at this. Do you know what I mean? It's so difficult. I mean, I think we deal with it all day. We are the dream scenario for a skeptic or a debunker, should we say, because we can't prove anything that we're saying. The actual proof is imprinted in Steve's mind. It's imprinted in Paul's mind, and this Paul. And I can't pull it out to show anybody. And so we've just got to put us faith in top quality witnesses and just gather as much evidence as we can and just hope that people are going to take us seriously. It's a hard one, isn't it?
It is. I get the impression there's not enough hours in the day, Paul.
There isn't today. Today, Paul, I've been to Forest in North Yorkshire, all COVID safe, by the way. We've been doing filming for the documentary. 2 people, separate cars. We've been out there. Need to stress that. I've come home, had a bite to eat, jumped in shower. We're doing this now, and then tonight I'm off to the cliff tops at Bempton because, amazingly, it's happening. We've waited probably myself and Bob Brown. He's not been coming out with me for the last month because of COVID, because he works in a charity shop.
Bob's your neighbour, is that right?
He lives in the top flat in this same property that I converted to flats years ago.
Okay.
And so even though he's in a flat, they're all self-contained. So we don't. My wife's very keen with this COVID. Well, regardless of what people want to believe, whether it's as worse than you think than I think, or not as bad, she takes it seriously. So that's good enough for me. Yeah. So we've been over 6 months on them cliff tops, hoping to see the light form phenomena. Monday night, an amateur photographer, I think it was Monday, it was the 14th, so whatever date the 14th was, guys, and he went to Flamborough from Leeds, and he's taking photographs with a 30-second time lapse. And anybody that wants to go onto our website, truthproof.uk, and that's where the books will be sold for the bulk of them now. If you want to go onto the website, Don Lodge has been building this website for me, made a brilliant job. But we've got the photograph. The guy's been kind enough to let us put this photograph on. And Paul, Steve, it's an amazing photo. He's took one photograph in this 30-second time lapse, gathering as much light, I should imagine, to take this incredible photograph of North Landing and the sea. And whilst he's taking the photograph, one orange light appears over the sea. Then another. Then another. And he gets them and manages to get the photograph. Because this guy is a professional, he also teaches photography and stuff. He's been able to educate me, who knows nothing about photography really. And he's telling me, look, this thing or these things were pretty much stationary because there would have been motion blur. The stars are all crisp and where they should be. There's no movement, he said.
Precisely.
On a tripod, taken with a remote. So we've got an incredible picture from this guy. I went up the following night with the Sony camcorder. I managed to film them 3 times. So I got them. So it's happening. They're not coming up from ships. They're not flares. They're not getting dropped from aircraft. There were people, so we're in Bridlington, there were people in Hornsey seeing them, and there were people in Scarborough seeing them. What the photographer from Leeds noted when he took this incredible photograph was that dogs were barking all over the place.
Okay.
Wow.
But now what I noted, and I was up there with a guy called Mick Ganley, who was an interesting guy, Paul. You might want him on your show at some point. And I'm trying to film these things, so when I say I'd noted it, I need to give Mick the credit. Mick said, listen to gulls. The gulls were going crazy, you know, squawking and screeching. So, yeah, it's interesting. So the phenomena is unfolding. So you're just saying there's not enough hours in the day, Paul. You're correct, because where am I going in between 7:30 and 7:15? I'm heading back up there.
Back out again.
on film.
I'm very glad I pointed you in the direction of that photograph, Paul. I really am.
Yes,
Because-
absolutely. It was a good spot. Yeah.
Because you're the only person I thought of when I saw it, and it is worth people looking at because it is.
Now I'm embarrassed because it was you.
No, it's all right. You're the man. You're the man. You're the only man I thought would.
Well, the guy has been very, very generous and allowed us to use the photograph.
Oh, fantastic.
We got to see the photo. Well, you've seen it. What do you think?
It's incredible because the detail in that photograph. It would be like I don't know, taking a very, very detailed shot of the Thames and London landmarks, and then right at the back in the sky, there's like the Starship Enterprise. It's one of those sort of photographs. You just think it's completely incongruous, but it's there. It's detailed, and you're quite right. A 30-second exposure. If they were moving, the picture would be spoiled.
Yeah,
but they're not moving. They are static.
Yeah,
and
he said that one came on. He thought, "Oh, that's odd. What's that? That's strange." And then another one, and then another. So we'd got the three light forms, and the colour that he's captured in the photograph is the colour that we're actually seeing when we're looking at these objects, or whatever they are. I'm tempted to say objects because there's an ex-Ministry of Defence contractor who I'll be writing about him in next book. He's called John Pink. That's his real name. That's not an insult to John either, by the way, but that's he's allowing me to use his real name. And he I can't remember the date, but he saw spheres whilst working on a MOD contract in a house that he was renting over the sea. I'll not say where, but he saw the spheres of light, but he observed them with high-powered binoculars and noted pyramids inside them, which is interesting, isn't it? So it makes you wonder, is there anything structured within this light, or are they intelligent light forms? Is it intelligent light? When Chris Turner came to the cliff tops with us, and his friend Jerry Denning, the lighting and sound engineer, he were able to measure in, is it Kelvin or Kelvin, the actual intensity of the light. He were quite surprised. Another thing that I need to note as well, because I've now got a thermal camera, quite a good one. When I put the thermal camera on the spheres of light over the sea that I saw the other day, you can't see them. They're not signature. So you obviously you can't see the stars. You can't see anything that's cold. You're not going to see it. It'll pick up a heat source. And I'm glad I did, because I'm thinking, well, if people are going to say afterburners, well, we're going to see them. They're going to be glowing hot in the sky. I couldn't see anything. You can see the ships on the horizon and the heat points on the boats, various places, but these things, there were nothing.
Do you see any similarities, Paul, in the lights at Hessdalen and the Brown Mountain lights? Did they link up for you, or do you think perhaps that they're just totally different phenomenon? No,
I think it might be same or very similar phenomena. And, the light phenomena, I think it gets used for, we'll jump to that in a moment, but it gets used for a lot of things. We go to Danes Dyke, which isn't far away, and they talk about the ghost, the White Lady. People I've spoken to said, oh, well, I've seen the White Lady. But when you get speaking to them, they've seen a white sphere of light. They've not seen a structured lady in a white dress floating around Danes Dyke. There's up at Bempton, the fishermen, the rock anglers talk about the Ghost of Big Railings, because they'll walk down and they'll see something about the size of a headlamp, what the anglers wear. Yeah. Or not near the railings. And they walk down to it and it disappears and there's no one there. They've seen it from the car park walking down. Not just one guy. There's quite a lot of them. But they're perceiving it as a rock angler, and they call it the Ghost of Big Railings. But it's a sphere of light.
It's totally bizarre, isn't it?
What did you say prior to that, Paul? And I jumped from it, didn't I? What
in regards to Hessdalen, you mean?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. I spoke to Philip Mantle. I was quite at length about it. He's got a friend who was heavily involved in the Hessdalen in the project. I think he was one of the lead guys in it. And he always believed, like me, that there was some intelligence attached to these lights. Philip doesn't. I'm quite happy to accept Philip's explanations, providing he's not going to jump all over mine. He thinks that they're Earthlights, but from my own point of view, what the thing we're dealing with here, when I took a rock angler up to get his account of what he perceived as a spaceship landing on the cliff tops at the back of us at Bempton, and I asked him if he'd seen the spheres of light, how Bob Brown was with us, and he said he'd never seen them, and he'd fished the cliff tops 50 years. It was literally within 5 to 10 minutes that 2 appeared over us heads. He saw them, Bob saw them, we all saw them. We got the camera out, they switched off. To me, there's an awareness of some kind to what we're looking at, and it's interacting with our consciousness. There's another rock angler observed a particularly bright star up in the heavens over the sea that he's not familiar with, because he's thinking, well, I've fished here many times and I don't know what that star is. But he made the connection and instantly it were over his head. Obviously, he knows it weren't a star. He said, and it lit the ground up like a welder's torch. He says the grass looked silver. And as fast as it arrived, it had gone. There's an intermind connection. Just like with the cryptids, that the people perceive and feel this strangeness before the strangeness is actually visually seen. Can we say visually seen? It sounds a bit silly, that, doesn't it? But
I think we can go with that. That's fine.
And, it's interesting because there's the old story of Spring-Heeled Jack from Victorian days, and indeed, I think Spring-Heeled Jack came from sightings straight from London all the way up to Lincolnshire and beyond, to Liverpool as well. And if you look at some of those reports about him or about it, there's an awful lot of cryptid stuff going on there. And what they thought might have been a top hat may have been just an elongated head that a cryptid may have. It's just that experience and that knowledge that people have. They will put it in terms that they understand and hope other people understand.
We were fitting it into a box that we.
It's a cultural box. It's a cultural box of what they know.
Yeah, and that is why going back to the debunkers and the skeptics, they're in the prime position all of the time, in my opinion, because when they cough forward their explanation for something, if it's plausible, then the general population, the populace who haven't experienced, some of them haven't experienced anything, will think, yeah, well, that's what it were. I believe it when I see it. What's he on about? They've seen something like a werewolf in a forest. You know what I mean? Their eyes are playing tricks on them. Do you know what I mean? It's always going to be a difficult one, and we're never going to please everybody, are we? I think we've just got to, Steve, we've just got to remain true to ourselves.
Precisely.
And my role, I think, is to give the witness as much ammunition as I possibly can find. So if there's a UFO sighting, I'll look to find out anything else unusual that's happened to pack around that sighting. I won't make it up. I'll look for the information, and if I can find it, I'll say, yeah, you can. Okay, so you don't believe that this guy's seen multiple spheres of light over the sea at Bempton, but look what else happened that week, and look what else happened 3 weeks before. We're just sort of rolling here with things, but there's no actual scenario there, as you know. But it's just a matter of just being as intense with and as true as you can to the witness's story, and well, just doing it justice, doing what somebody's told you justice, and not just putting it down in a sightings report on a website and thinking I've done my job.
Mm-hmm. It's got to be nice for the when the witness contacts you, Paul, and you actually turn around to them and say, "Do you know what? I actually believe you." Does that come as quite a relief to some people?
Oh, very much so, yeah. And since writing Night People, and I thought we were going to talk about this tonight, Paul, weren't we? Really?
I think we might get round to it.
Night People. I've had lots of people say what you've written about and what I heard you speaking about happened to me, and I'm so relieved that somebody's spoke about it. I know I'm not breaking new ground here. I know these stories have been told on similar lines by other people. So I just think it's good. I think we've just got to get the information out there.
I think that's fair enough. Let's talk about the book.
Okay.
Let's do it. Because I think we could talk all night. I mean, my mind was going off on all sorts of wild travails with Spring Hill Jack there, who had left tracks across a snowy roof.
On a rooftop, yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and that when you were talking about the clay tiles, I started thinking about that. So
that's exactly how I started, because
yeah,
Spring Hill Jack, there'd be no weight, so effectively he would be able to walk across and like a ballet dancer, effectively.
My good friends Forrest and Scott, who run the Astonishing Legends podcast, they say that everything is connected, and I think they're probably right.
I would agree.
Let's talk about the book, Paul. Can I just hit you up for a couple of stories from the book, and see how we go, because we're where are we? We're nearly an hour in already. So some of the things that stood out from the book for me, the story of the Reverend Tom Willis. Would you give us a little?
Yeah, that was 1994, as I think. That's the year we moved in. And we'd been clearing the house. We bought the house fully furnished. We found it odd. We'll get to Tom Willis in a moment, but we found it odd that there were pictures on sideboards, cutlery on draining boards, even pots and pans, chamber pots under beds, because it's a big old Victorian house. So we cleared all this. We're clearing everything. But we found bags and bags of letters. And I don't just mean like 2 or 3 bin liners, or bags of them. And my dad were outside with a 45-gallon oil drum on, and we're just burning stuff. And we didn't have lots of money, so we didn't get tons of skips. And burning out that had burned, we burnt. We wouldn't get away with it today, would we? But we did. So we're burning all these letters. But at one point, we stopped and sort of had a look at what they were. And there were lots of different writing on each letter. So italic writing, and then sort of writing that weren't very good, a bit sort of looked like a 7-year-old had done it, and then half decent writing. And it were all different things, all paragraphs of different cameos of different events or situations. And we deciphered that it was spirit writing. It were all people had been, that we found out from neighbours then that the couple that had owned it had been having seances and sort of trying to make contact with the dead. So these letters had been written. Is it automatic writing? I mean, I've never done anything like that. Is that what they call it? So I don't know. So anyway, it weren't very long into moving into the house, because I'd been working on it for a few weeks before we even moved in to get hot water on and things like that. There's a knock on the door. Our girls are little at the time. I think Sarah probably been about 8 or 9. Might have been a bit older. But anyway, no, she weren't. But, and I'm rambling, guys. I do it all the time.
It's all right.
I'm having a conversation with myself, aren't I? So, the comforts of madness, that's what it is. So, I'm sorry. So, there's a knock on the door. I've finished work and I go to the door. And there's this guy at the door, Reverend Tom Willis, explained who he was and said he'd been and blessed the house once before. Well, I said, well, why are you here? He says, well, I'd like to bless the house. I'd heard that the new family's moved in. Could I? And so I let him in. And he followed us upstairs, and he's got a bottle of water, as I remember. But he's walking upstairs and sort of looking at all the things. And we just a huge staircase that sort of weaves round and round. Up 3 floors to the top, and when we stripped all the wallpaper off, don't know what the significance here is, but there were little copper gargoyles every sort of 3 foot all the way around, and we haven't got one. My wife comments on that, annoyed why we threw them away. I don't know what they were. They look hideous. But anyway, you get to the top of the house, and he said, I wouldn't let your daughter sleep in this room. And he sort of opens the door. This is the room where in night people, the neighbours over the road, had seen the spheres of light whilst they were sat in there. Well, the guy sat in his front room during the night, and he's observing the spheres of light in the top of our house. And he described it as will-o'-the-wisp. He said, because it just dropped through the floor and it were into another room.
Wow.
Do you know what I'm saying? Apart from that top bedroom, the other ones are sort of front rooms, if you know what I mean. So I looked round and Sarah stood at the back of me. It was Sarah's room. So she's, when the Tom Willis has just said this. Now, it weren't his fault. I should have noted it as well. And I weren't rude to the guy, but I said, she's frightened to death. I think you better leave. And looking back on it now, it was as much my fault as his. I should have noted it, but I weren't expecting him to come out with anything like that. So I asked him to leave. And on reflection, I wish I'd have found out more. I wish I'd have known what he'd experienced or what he'd been told had happened in the property, because he was known at one time as Britain's official exorcist. And there's been TV documentaries made about him. I would have thought in the 1990s. I think he was resident at Trinity Church in Bridlington. There's something that I'm interested in for a little writing project, to find out if there's a paper trail of places he's been and experiences that he's had. I mean, it might be there at some point, and I will look into that. So yeah, that was the Reverend Tom Willis episode, that if you want to call it that, Paul.
It's odd, isn't it, that a guy who got a name for being an exorcist or similar would suddenly turn up.
Yeah.
And of all the houses that he could go to, it's just utterly bizarre. High strangeness, you call it.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at it's a little favourite of mine, actually, from the book, The Blacksmith's Workshop.
That was on Church Street. I was born on Church Street, literally width of a road. There's the sandstone building, the blacksmith's workshop on the right, and there's Quarry Street that goes up to Mexborough. I know I overdo a picture, guys, and there's these little cottages of Church Street on the other side of the road. I was born in the bottom one.
I've got to say, the goose pimples have started already, because I've read this, and this is horrifying.
Stone staircase in the house. Just give a description of the house, even though I don't know if I've done that in book, but a stone staircase. Outside toilet. I've got no memories of it, because I was born in that house, and then we moved a short time later to Old Dennerby, where my dad had been brought up as well all his life to a young adult until joining RAF. But this particular day, we lived in Old Dennerby at the time. We used to walk across down past the YB pond, over the River Don Bridge, over the canal, up Ferryboat Lane, and onto Church Street. Now, as we're walking on Church Street, I hated it. I was dragging my feet. I carrying shopping with my mum. I couldn't stand it. 2 buses a day into Old Dennerby, and my mum and dad didn't have a lot of money. So seriously, it was cheaper to walk, and that's what we did. And I think it was Hillard's supermarket. But there's these stones jutting out from the disused blacksmith's shop. I said in the book, I think they were used for farrier to just help him work and things. And it's been shut up for quite a long time. It used to belong to a guy called Charlie Shaw. Spoke to the Shaw family, so I got the dates of, and I'm right, when it was shut up and everything. I spoke to him whilst I was writing Night People. So this particular day, I'm dragging my feet, but it was a great adventure to jump on these stones. And it was boarded up, and it had lots and lots of panes of glass in the front window. And I don't know if anybody realises that blacksmith shops did have lots of panes, because there was the potential for little shards of steel and stuff to go through windows. If it were one big pane, you'd be replacing loads all the time. Well, a bit of the ply boarding that were covering the disused blacksmiths up was ripped away at the bottom. And I looked in it. And as I look in it, and this is the craziest thing, and I could see a green leather sofa. Same as what were in my nan's at Conisborough. Dark green, like British racing green, leather. It's a real old-fashioned thing. And a kiln that's glowing. It's on. It's on. That's a daft word, isn't it? It's on. It's all glowing, and it's stoked up. But there's an old lady, and she's not at the window at this time, but I can see her, and she's dressed in sort of a dull grey-white colour, and she's got a bun in her hair. I imagine she had a pin in it, but I don't think I've got a proper memory of that. And little wire rimmed glasses, I remember them. And excuse me, shouting my mum to come. Quick, come and look at this. Can't believe it. Worse to that effect. I'm a little boy, aren't I? I don't know what I'm saying exactly, but I'm shouting her to come, and I'm looking through this window. And this old lady turns and comes to the window, and we're that far apart, and she's looking at me. and there's a little smile on her face, and it's weird. It's just the strangest thing. I can see her now, so old and frail, and my mum's had enough by this time because she's got into distance and she's shouting me, so off I go. All I can think of on the way back is to get to them stones, climb up, because I've told her all about it, and I look, it's in darkness. There's no kiln, there's no sofa, there's no old lady. It's just in darkness. And I'll take that to grave with me. I'll take all stories to grave with me from night people, because they happened. That weren't sleep paralysis. I were on Church Street. I mean, I did think, when I wrote the book, Paul and Steve, I did think that I was going to have some kind of download of information. Now I'm concentrating on it. This stuff's really going to come back to me. Lots and lots of sort of bits of information that I'd previously forgot. But there were just 2 bits. One of them were in 1994 when the spindles turned white, but I did see what I perceived as beings coming up from the staircase from this huge landing. But the other one was on Church Street that day. And the only bit was I was kicking leaves. It were autumn. But I forgot about kicking all these piles of leaves on Church Street, the sycamore leaves. So it's no great revelation. It's no great sort of breakthrough of information. But for me, in a way, it was. I established a season, should we say. So we got there, didn't we? We did that story.
Yeah. I think, if I was to refer to these as stories, I don't think I'd be doing them justice,
No.
They are facts.
Well, it happened to me. It happened. And I don't care how people want to believe them or disbelieve them. We're all entitled to his opinions, and there might be people thinking, well, Paul, I think Paul's talking a load of BS. Well, that is your opinion. I can't change that. I'm just going to, but I will continue saying it as it happened. I don't think I'm going to be able to add much more to them. A few people have said to me, would you consider regression or some kind of hypnosis? I think I would for the right, if the right people I could be put in touch with the right people. My problem is I'm frightened that I'm going to add to the story, and it's going to be disingenuous.
Yeah.
Not even meant to be, but I don't know. I think they're as bare and as accurate as I can get them at the moment,
Absolutely. And I think you've got these down on paper, and like you said earlier on, they're rattling around inside your head like marbles. So the more you can get down on paper, the better. So Night People 2.
I don't think there's room for. I seriously, Paul, I don't think I've got any more that I could give.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is. If I could have got the Book of the Strange, that's what it was titled. I just wrote it in pen and ink on the front. If I could get it off the person that stole it from me, I think we'd have more.
That's incredibly honest, Paul, because others would see pound signs and write another book. Steve, you're a big fan of Night People. I know you are. Is there another story in the book that you'd like to hear?
I mean, the stuff about Mr. Lodge is frightening. The neighbour from hell. You can sort of.
Go on, sorry.
No, it was just one of those. I think we've all had them, but there's something very insidious and very. I was sort of thinking along the lines of the second Poltergeist movie of the Reverend, who's actually demonic.
Yeah,
and that's the sort of the image that you were giving me of this character that lived next door to you.
The seam sat in. We built a window seat in. We realised there was something strange. We moved into this little semi-detached house on Sprotborough Road. It was in Doncaster, and lovely area it was. And the first time we realised anything strange were happening, they'd had an old couple living in house next door to them for years, so they weren't used to the noise. Suddenly, 4 girls had descended onto the property, children playing, laughter, and that must come as a shock. And we weren't neighbours that played loud music or anything, but we know when kids went to bed on a night, me and Mary were probably sitting bottom of the garden with a coffee or something and just sort of, I think, thank God they've gone to bed, just relax. But the next door curtains would be open. It'd just be like a big black hole looking up at their window. and you'd see cigarette glow up dark in the darkness, like the glow, and it'd move about, and it was strange. And then you'd see the door open from the landing, and you'd see the old lady that lived there, a silhouette of her, come in and then shut the door. And we just found it a bit creepy. And then I built a window seat in the front of the house, and we'd sit before we went to bed and have a coffee or something and chat. And then on Sprotborough Road, if a car with particularly bright headlights or a lorry went past, it'd shine up the inside of next door's bedroom. They were always in darkness, and he'd be sat on a chair looking at us, and it was sinister. And then if I'd be back to him, he'd come to the window, and Mary'd say, "He's there, he's behind you." And by the time I turned around, you'd just see him like slip. And it was so strange. But there were a series of strange, almost, I'm inclined to think they're almost like out-of-body experiences. And Mary shared them as well. It didn't go on for weeks, but there were just a time. Mary said that she thought he'd been stood at the side of our bed in the night, and I'd woken up and thought he were there as well. He'd come through the wardrobes, and I realised that there's people going to be listening to this thinking, now he's really gone nuts. I don't know what were happening. I don't think that, I don't understand it. It was like a shared experience. But then there was one night, and it could have been a dream. This has nothing to do with some kind of alien visitation, but I woke up and I was in a bathroom, and it was a black and white tiled floor. The sink had transfer flowers around it that I think they were pink and green leaves, and there was a smell. That's the interesting bit. I couldn't pinpoint the smell. And Mr. Lodge, I mean, it's in the night, and the door opened in the bathroom, and I'm in this dream. And because we need to point out that the stories from Night People aren't me, Paul, in a dream, that I believe what was happening happened, but this scenario I can't untangle. And he'd look round the door at me, and years, a few years went past. I think we were there about 5 years, and he'd gone away somewhere, and the old lady was shouting. And so I've described the bathroom. There was a smell in the bathroom I couldn't fathom, and the old lady was shouting. I think it was our Gemma, and she was stuck in the bedroom, and the old sort of Bakelite handles, the spindle or something had broke. And as a joiner, I went round and fixed it for her. I let myself in, opened downstairs, and fixed this door handle. And I'm looking at that bathroom because I knew I'd been in my dream in that bathroom. And I asked her, could I use the toilet? And I opened the bathroom door, black and white tiled floor, transfers round the sink, and Wright's cold tar soap was hell. And it was there. And it was just the weirdest situation. Now, that were detached from the situations that I've written about in Night People, or all of the other situations, because, as I say, you can't wake up in the night and perceive that you're seeing something akin to what people describe as an alien, and you could sort of have that experience and think, that were a vivid dream, that was a horrible dream. But when you've actually woken up then, and you've got a series of holes in your arms and a series of holes in your left arm on another occasion and holes in your back on another occasion, you realise that there's something more than lucid dreaming, more than a vivid imagination actually taking place. I couldn't stab my back like what these things did to me with these great bloody holes in my back. Sorry for swearing, guys, but I couldn't do that. And the doctor's saying that the wounds extended deep into the dermis. And will you tell us, Mr. Sinclair, who's done this to you? You can tell us in confidence. And I'm sat there, and they know I'm just lying. But the truth of it was the farthest thing in the world away from what they thought had happened. They thought some male or my wife had physically abused me. Shoved something into my back. You've just shown us a pen there, as big as a pen, as thick as a pen, and left deep holes in my back, which are still scarred. They're still scarred on my arms. And you can't do that to yourself.
No.
And, it's, I don't know. I hope I've not been too intense, guys. It's just...
No. Oh, the Mr. Lodge stuff was whether or not I brought back strange memories for me of new neighbours moving in, and you never quite sure of them, and they always look a little bit suspicious and all that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But it affected me. That actually, that story did affect me when I was reading it, because
Well,
it's
I don't mean it in a sarcastic way, but I'm sort of glad that it's touched people in certain ways. I mean, the name Mr. Lodge, obviously we changed his name.
yeah.
And I need to, we maybe have time, you maybe have time to leave this little bit in. I need to give full credit to Don Lodge, who helped me edit the book. I wrote the book. You know, what the content of the book has come out of this head, but Don Lodge put it together in such a way and structured the chapters. For instance, adding chapter 1, the day night came to stay, that weren't intended to go there. I would have had that as the second chapter. Don said, no, that's more impacting. And I've got Don to thank for quite a lot. He's built the website for me. So I'm full of praise. And
I'm a really big Hammer horror fan, and that whole story was like from one of their TV anthologies. But it's even more frightening because it's real.
yes,
There's an ethereal. There's the quality in that it's not fantasy. It's actually happened, and
it weren't nice.
it's not nice. And there is a conclusion to that story because of what happened to you, of these dreams, of these nightmares, and of that image that you had of that bathroom, be it premonition or whatever you might be able to call it. You went in there, and it's exactly how something told you it would be, even to the smell.
You're spot on. I've thought about it many times. You know, is it the fact that we, for a short period of time, we were so focused on this guy being acting sinister that he were consuming our thoughts, and we'd somehow tapped into some other part of our mind. And I've always, I say it like that, as in times of great stress and emotion. You know, like as if someone passes away, a loved one. A lot. I don't mean all the time, but sometimes people claim to have seen their loved one a short time after they've passed away. Is that because they're concentrating so much and they're actually accessing or creating a different frequency where they're actually able to see these things and interact with the loved one? I don't know.
See, it's funny you say that, but when my son passed away 6 years ago, he was 7, and a few months later, so really away from the whole grief type of thing, that early grief, I was on the phone to somebody. I won't say who it was, but we both heard him. And my son was very, very disabled. He verbalized, but it wasn't really in wording and that sort of thing. But we both heard him. It was like an old-fashioned break in the... You know how sometimes when you... In the old days, you get cross lines and that sort of thing. Yeah. There was like an old-fashioned break, and he was there for about 5 seconds. And I swear to God, he was there. Never happened again. I don't know whether I found peace after that, but it was there and it was gone. And that happened. That happened.
That happened. Yeah. And what I say after hearing something like that, somebody like yourself or some other genuine people tell me something like that, I challenge anybody when it's something as personal and something as precious as what you've just told me. People don't make that stuff up, and that is a. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, I wish, in a way, I wish it never happened.
Yeah.
You know, I wish it didn't happen, but it did happen, and we both heard it. Yeah. We both said, "Do you know what that sounded like?" Because it came on, and we both, there was like that little bit of silence, and I actually remember saying, "Well, you know who that sounded like, don't you?"
Yeah,
and it sounded like him because he couldn't speak, even though he was 7.
It's a very interesting story, and I have a friend, I'm not going to say his name, and he lost his son a few years ago, and he told me a similar thing. I mean, it might be that another one that I'll pass you the name afterwards, Paul, and you might want to speak to this guy because he's one of Britain's leading landscape artists.
Okay.
Wow.
That's as much as we'll say. And he's got an amazing story, very similar to what, and a lot of connection. He's poured a lot of time and effort since that tragedy into this.
Paul, as we draw this to a close, thank you for being with us. It is an absolute pleasure to have you.
It's an honour.
And it's
a
a pleasure to hear you on other shows too, because you've got a lot of integrity as an investigator, and to hear it from the horse's mouth is, we just sit back and listen, and you take us there. Your book, Paul, has got forwards by some pretty impressive names. You've got Howard Hughes, Whitley Strieber, Nick Pope, Robbie Williams, and Philip Mantle. All of those people rate you as an investigator. Otherwise, they wouldn't write for you. That must be incredibly humbling.
It's wonderful, and I'm so grateful because, I've had a lot of help as regards,
Yeah.
Just a few kind words from somebody like Whitley Strieber when you're starting out on the first Truth Proof book. That actually can keep you going for 6 months. It sounds a bit silly, that, but it really can, because it lifts you. And these people don't have to invest that time. Just a few words, and I like to think that I help other people, and you help. Steve does. It's all we've all got to try and be there for each other. Because regardless of what outsiders might think about the subject of the unexplained, it's real. Do you know what he said? Which amazed me. It's a few years ago now. It's before Night People, and he said he didn't. And I think he's put it in one of his podcasts after he'd spoken to me. He didn't know anybody that had been, interfered with or more than Paul Sinclair with the visitors.
Wow.
As he calls them, the visitors, doesn't he? Yeah.
Mm.
Which were a nice. I don't know. It's a nice thing to say. I don't know. I don't know what the correct terminology would be, but it's good. It's good, and I've heard people criticise Whitley's story and say that it's not true. And I've read it. I've listened to the guy. I find him humbling. I believe his story. Let me put it that way. And there's certain elements I can't relate to, but that doesn't mean the guy's telling a lie.
That's right.
There'll be a lot of things within Night People that nobody's experienced before, but it don't. I mean, I know we've run out of time, Paul, but it does. We've got 2 rabbits and a guinea pig on a lane in 1970, and I don't know anybody else that might have experienced that apart from the guy who were walking home, and he told his mum and dad what he'd seen, and I don't know if he saw them beings, but we'll leave that one for another day.
Well, we can, and funnily enough, it was on my list of stories to get, but I think people can read it in the book. And they may well hear you talk about it elsewhere too. As far as the book's concerned, Paul, where can people get it?
People can purchase the books directly from our website now, truthproof.uk. So there's all the 3 Truth Proof books and the Night People. And, or they can still be purchased via Amazon. So it's entirely up to anyone who's sufficiently interested. But as I say to everybody, read reviews. You don't necessarily just buy a book because you've sat and listened to me speak today. Read the reviews and look what other people think. I mean, there's a few hundred reviews on other books, and I don't know all these people, and they've been quite favourable. So I think the easiest thing to say is I'm not going to say buy me a book. I'd say read reviews.
Paul Sinclair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Paul.